Mm-mm. Mama. The usual greeting is usually Otsua, but I figure a change is perhaps needed. I would say more than likely, Kon Okami may be the more proper introduction moving forward. So, with that in mind, Kon Okami observers. This is your main timeline tool amongst your travels. Arc Okami. So, today, this will, of course, be the very start towards the ever ambitious project moving forward. Known to provide a large quantity of lore towards many influential characters and figures within this world, the world of Erinn. It's also a means of establishing the primary basis and onset towards the progression of said characters that we, of course, encounter within the world of Erinn. Now, I would like to say, first and foremost, first starting this off, I had decided to make this concept solidarity in the onset present chance that it is, of course, my effort towards making a fair bit of likeness and or contrast in the overall development or progression of the story that we will, of course, be proceeding through thus far within this world itself. Now, with that being said, I would like to say, first and foremost, I am an avid fan of the Fate franchise and all of their works from then on and moving forward, such as Fate Zero, Fate Stay Night, Fate Heaven Feels, Fate Ilia, Fate Grand Order, and so on and so forth. With that in mind, the past several years, I've taken as much, or rather, worked on as much effort into incorporating that very same or similar likeness in all of the present concepts in regards to uh, my devotion to the series as a whole, such as naming off pretty much 7 of the major classes that are associated with heroic spirits, that being the Saber, Lancer, Archer, Berserker, Assassin, Caster, and Rider. And while, of course, moving forward with this predetermined notion in mind, I had made every effort into attempting to make sure that, at the very least, I could incorporate those factors or premises into my overall onset gameplay throughout all of my streams in any and all regards. In terms of the subclasses for many of those servants, heroic spirits or what have you would call them, um, in regards to the series in and of itself. With that concept in mind, I say that it would, without a doubt, be quite apparent to revolve a particular scenario of sorts in the same fashion as how any fan fiction made creation, whom is of course made by a devoted fan, implements their own elements or character creation and development into the overall story, whether it be a story that is following through with the concepts already canonized to the series, or whether or not it is a completely self-created scenario in that regard. Nonetheless, I would love to take away from that as a means of establishing that particular circumstance as one of the primary bases of moving through the progression of the story in regards to the overall conflicts and progression all in together towards what Erinn's based story is deriving from as a whole. So to put that in simple terms, I'll be making an attempt towards providing a fairly similar circumstance or situation if the presence of a particular universe were to be applied to or under the influence or direction of another universe in this case. And with this whole concept in mind, what with all of that which Mabinogi in itself is, of course, capable of, I find that it would feel as if to match this very scenario, quite possibly, would be to impart a specific character into this situation that would very much be the overall best fit into being able to proceed forward with the story that Mabinogi has to share with everyone. Okay, let me implement a theme. So, hopefully this isn't a means for copyright, as this is, of course, a numerical song that is pretty much established as part of the game of itself. But we shall see. If not, I'll just simply have to. So we'll simply have to make changes and edit out the overall audio for this to begin with in the first place. I'll be making an attempt to go through this again, and instead of implementing the track as a whole to begin with, that of course belongs ultimately to the very game that you are witnessing before your eyes, I will just make a simple recording or voiceover from there and then implement it as such through the power of editing. So this is, of course, Erinn's theme. That is the wife of Krog, the leader of the giants. So essentially, she is, of course, the queen in such a case. And I would imagine that this very theme fits very well in this circumstance and premise. Okay. So, if I could, of course, have your attention with some of the onset aspects that make a very notable distinction of intertwining amongst both of these different universes to begin with in the first place. On one hand, we have pretty much the premise of establishing the basis of the Fate Grand Order premise or timeline, where on this premise, and allow me to put it on display. You have the window of course the Chaldea organization. Just from a rough general understanding, when it comes to in regards to the Chaldea organization, it is established as a security research facility, ultimately with the sole purpose in mind to help maintain and that was a bit louder than I thought. Okay. Apologies for that. Okay, so with that in mind, as you can see, the Chaldea organization is, of course, ultimately responsible with preventing the certain extinction of the human race. So, with that primary goal in mind, their overall presence and research has pretty much uncovered the means of enabling them to pretty much traverse through different passages through time, and making use of a special form of technology or form of science that enables them to infuse heroic spirits from different time periods throughout all of human history with that of experimented humans, otherwise known as, if I can remember the name correctly, just a moment. Designer babies. Now, taking note of this primary premise, they had managed to acquire a means of possessing three heroic spirits within this operation. The first one, perhaps I might be end up going into a bit of spoilers a bit too far on this account, but overall, what seemed to be able to fit this overall image from my own perspective will of course be the spirit Galahad, whom was obtained from the Knights of the Round Table, an organization that was of course organized from King Arthur himself, the man whom held Excalibur. Galahad was of course an provisional knight in and of itself, and from my understanding, he was ultimately dedicated towards providing an onset generalized defense towards the kingdom and his charge, based on the order given to him by his king, whom was of course the leader of the Knights of the Round Table. With that being said, prior to the operations of the Chaldea establishing a means of fusing Mash Kirlite with Galahad, the heroic spirit, she was of course established as the product of success, within this primary procedure. And as a result, her infusion enabled... Apologies. Her infusion enabled her to inhibit and inherit the powers that Galahad possesses. And thus far, as a result, this enabled her to become a shield class servant. Which, as you can see before you, bringing this down, I've taken the liberty and effort towards composing and establishing the effort into presenting that overall presence with this particular Milletian, as you can see before you. What with all the stats present, she is of course outfitted towards that very same notion to overall mimic and implement that similar comparison towards the original mesh as a prominent shield class servant. With that premise in mind, I felt that out of all of the notable scenarios that enabled this to happen, it felt that Grand Order was very much the best bet with being able to pull off this very concept. What with the initial direction to where the story itself from that particular universe unfolds towards. Being that with a society that is, of course, humankind being pretty much on the brink of extinction, the Chaldea organization that is based on headquarters, or rather a base stationed within the Antarctic, enables the overall capabilities of mankind to trespass to transcend through the reaches of space and time throughout many time periods, and perhaps more than likely dimensions as well, in some special or unique cases. With this very concept in mind, I felt it would, without a doubt, be quite possible and probable to enable a present situation or scenario that came to mind that enabled one of the agents that commenced with the overall operations of running and establishing missions throughout the time periods to unexpectedly incur a form of accident that results in them delving into a world that is, of course, inhabited by humans. This world in particular being Erinn. And as thus, with this particular concept in mind, the presence and capabilities of a servant being quite prominent does indeed fit with this particular variation in and of itself. Now, to bring to note on my point, there was an event several years back, by my recollection, that enabled the inhibiting of a collaboration between the Fate Stay Unite universe and the universe of Erinn. To provide essential proof to this, there are notable items that though seldom and rather rare to encounter, have been, of course, observed and seen for being present within the world itself. To name an example, if one can be observed or seen, let's take for an example the bow that which the servant archer uses within the Fate Stay Night universe, which I am quite certain is present. That's a bit unfortunate. Let's see. Let's see. A notable weapon. How about Excalibur? Well, I would believe this can be remedied in its own search by seeking out from the very source that would without a doubt have this very data for us to observe and witness for our own eyes. So drawing upon this data from the wiki itself, let's take out the search Excalibur. Excalibur as a weapon. Perhaps not as a skill. But this provides essentially clear proof on the overall collaboration and crossover between the contrasting Fate universe and the universe of Erinn thus far, as a bit of a means of proving my overall point towards this present concept. And to also make notion that it isn't too far out of reach to come under the belief that this very concept has been pretty much established already thus far. With the sword Excalibur, without a doubt, this brings us concrete proof that the establishment of the Fate universe has already been collaborated with the universe of Erinn thus far in the past. And thus far, extending on towards this, it was established in 2016. There are also notable other elements that establish or distinguish this fact as well, such as with the fact that Keroberosu is in possession of one of these notable bags. Let's see. Which I cannot seem to distinguish which category that would be in at this very moment. But nonetheless, the point still holds true within this regard. For Fate Stay Night, Ultimate Unlimited Blade Works. I would hope that this, of course, provides a bit of additional clarity in that regard. as well, moving forward. So, with that being said, in order to continue establishing that overall presence, I felt that in order to best fit on with the theme of connection, with reestablishing these two principal universes together, it would have to be drawn from the universe that resides with Grand Order. We of course have the agent Fujimaru being the master, and Mesh Kirillite being the servant in such a case. Two notable agents within the security organization, or the association that commences with these operations that transcends through the passages of time within their own universe, and perhaps even the spaces of said universes into others, to help with commencing with tasks, all towards the main goal of acquiring the Holy Grail. Now, with that then comes the overall comparisons and the choice of this particular individual in question, that being Mesh Kirillite. I had attempted with making the concepts in the past, but I would say with the first onset change, I had established Mesh as a human at first. Unfortunately, it was not quite befitting towards the overall full array of skill set that complements tremendously to the heroic spirit shield class Mesh Kirillite as a whole. And so, with that consideration in mind, it seemed quite obvious by the decision that Giant would very much be the best and safest option, with being able to establish the full array of generalized skill set that would make the essential established feel of Mesh being completely present within this world itself. Simply put, all of the skills that are eligible towards the Giant specifically, that all of which pretty much encompasses the shield class as a servant to its fullest extent, I would believe. Being able to implement and engage into combat with a warrior's presence of capability, and make full utilization of all forms of shield-like techniques in this regard as well. Taking for an example such as Windguard, defense also being presently and significantly stronger remotely, as opposed and in comparison to humans. We then have, of course, Taunt. We have the ability to charge without the shield. And according to on-set present evidence and recorded data, based on the numbers and statistics of giants and humans by comparison, Giants, without a doubt, are capable of possessing even greater will, and in turn, enabling them to be established as far better combatants within the talent class martial arts of fighter here quite presently. So at present, among and up to the top peak performance of establishing a full array and present placement within the capacity of a shield class kind of servant. In conjunction to this, I would say the giant by far fits the bill entirely. Even for the fact that the height may not match up all that much, the ability of being able to perform on the exact same likeness and classification as if one were established as a servant befitting towards that particular class is all the more an important statement to establish in this presence. That is, of course, how I felt moving forward towards this. Providing a little bit of essential data with coming up towards this very established presence. I would like to bring up data regarding masculinite here quite shortly. But first, going over the overall information in regards to the spirit that Mash herself inhabits. Galahad. He's of course known and established as Knights of the Round Table, as you can see before you, up on the display. I would like to, of course, read upon this very information itself, word for word. That'll, of course, help to support the overall appeal towards this connection. Galahad was a later addition to the Round Table, especially famed for his escapades in the search for the Holy Grail, alongside Percival and Bors. Galahad is the son of Lancelot, but he only saw Lancelot as the father while he was a boy, and both never got along that well. Galahad was admired as the perfect knight, the young boy who would shoulder the next generation of the Round Table. He was a saint who was the only one to obtain the Holy Grail, just to return it to the heavens. So, by this very depiction and description, one would without a doubt count Galahad as the lawfully good in the alignment order of things. Being present and pretty much establishing a means of being a peak example of the righteousness of the world that he himself had inhabited. I would imagine and believe that this could be established as a very important feature for being able to connect with another being in the process. That was, of course, the initial concept and overall outlook of the operation when it came to establishing a connection that would be best befitting towards fitting the synchronization of this particular spirit in mind. What with Galahad and Kirillite being able to balance themselves up to as much of a closely established synergy as one could best implement and apply a fusion towards. So he is called Galahad of Revelations, the Knight of Heaven, and the Knight of the Grail. And by appearance and by some quotes, the reading further on this, I would imagine some spoilers might end up making themselves apparent. But nonetheless, one could distinguish and call him quote-unquote Knight of Light within his own universe in this regard. What with all of the values and morals that he himself had followed. Now, moving on to the character whom inhabited his own spirit, being infused with him. That would, of course, be Mesh Kirillite, the very subject in question in this regard. Mesh is now a Shielder class servant, contracted with Ritsuka Fujimaru. So Ritsuka Fujimaru is, of course, the master and provides the resources of mana towards the Mesh and her ability to perform her duties as a servant. Though some would argue that she's a pseudo-servant, being that she is, of course, part human and part spirit at this point. It was, of course, the way she was, of course, inbred or bred to perform. Yes, as it says, a demi servant. As it stands, she, of course, inherited all of Heroic Spirit Galahad's abilities, being able to use the shield to its utmost full potential. Much like how giants are far more capable of bringing this overall onset ability out in terms of that class specifically. As it is, when Mesh was aged 10, the Chaldea performed their second Heroic Spirit summoning. While the project succeeded in summoning and binding a spirit to Mesh, the spirit failed to awaken. Galahad decried Chaldea's brutal experiments, briefly taking over Mesh's body in an attempt to escape. But when Mesh began to resist his control, he stopped. Galahad realized that she would die if he left her. He remained in her body so she could survive, but refused to awaken. So, that particular segment of his story, in regards to Mesh, puts into account. It seemed all far too befitting to establish the means of enabling a giant to pretty much represent that overall prospect and concept of Mesh Kirillite being brought into this particular universe. And with the context being that a sort of unexpected error had occurred that ended up having her transpire into a different realm entirely. With this place being rather quite abundant in magic energy, that is Erk. She is able to draw upon the erg or the mana within the area in the same likeness that would be quite similar to Fujimaru, her master being able to provide her as a resource the mana that he would bring out and derive from himself in the same regard. So, with that being put into perspective, I had made the attempts towards this, putting a great deal of effort into working on establishing as much combat application and expertise into this particular character, all in an effort to bring about the highest amount of potency that would, of course, represent Mesh Kirillite herself. Were she to be thrown into this world on accident, or through the mistake of scientific or technological error. So, with that in mind, I took as much time as possible bringing her up to the premises or parameters that would be the most befitting a shield type, or rather shielder class servant of that particular character's caliber. And that, of course, being in this kind of particular situation, she is one of the only notable agents that is known to commence with these sort of operations, alongside her master being Fujimaru. It seemed that with this choice in mind, she was without a doubt very much the best option for being able to proceed with the story, at the same time enable progression to continue occurring as we tackle each and every single generation moving forward. If I were to, of course, pick any of the other prominent options in this operation, I'd like to draw the attention of some of these options that would be established as another choice. So, bringing up the Chaldea once more on this concept. Our options would, of course, fall towards the next among the line would, of course, be her master, Ritsuka Fujimaru. He's a master, but he isn't a fighter at all. He's more so, I would say, a strategist kind of individual, and only fights through battles alongside Mesh as a resource manager. So, to put it into perspective, as of from what I have observed, he has absolutely no combat skills whatsoever. None from what I have seen or observed. We could see about locating them here on this list, but this is pretty much all that comes about with his own abilities when it comes to actual combat. I believe there is a particular universe or place in time where he acquires or extracts the abilities of a special influential hero within the presence of time of humans, the human timeline or something along those lines. Looking over his skills. Let's see, so from what I can determine, without a doubt, he is of course a mage and by extension a magus. This is quite apparent and a bit of a necessary established connection, as a servant can't perform if there isn't a magus nearby to provide a source of mana or magic for the servant to implement many of their abilities in question, nor activate their grand phantasm, which is a special attack that is unique to that servant specifically. So, with that being said, I'm looking upon this list thus far, and so far I do not see any indication of some abilities that he used in battle. In terms of anti-poison, this is pretty much an extended, well, to put it in general terms, a party buff provided to him through Mash Cure Light, being able to resist poison. So, in any and all case, without a doubt, I would say Fujimaru is not capable of establishing or commencing with combat-esque situations on his own. That being said, the next that would come to mind will of course be Solomon. Solomon, as you can see, is a caster's type servant. So he's clearly a mage. He could, without a doubt, be capable of casting a great deal of the array of spells that are associated with mage talent. What with being pretty much all of the elements that are provided to any mage enthusiast or practitioner of magic within the world of Erinn. Many of these not fully displaying the full capacity of a mage class, but can be of course found in through the methods that which they are of course learned, such as with the hard-fought meteor strike. You would have to go through the ultimate fire quest to obtain it. That is, once you establish the requirements of possessing a fireball at its highest rank. But that in and of itself requires some greater works by its own regard. So then, with Solomon, he is of course already established as the antagonist. king of magecraft for his mastery over magecraft, with the son of David and Bathsheba. It goes into a great deal of extended depth into where he, of course, originated from. Of course, he's established as a lawful good as well. I'm not quite certain on this, but supposedly in the screenplay, he is depicted as a bit of a villain for some strange reason. I think he was called the Mage King, but not enough data on this is enough for me to support to that statement of mine. So I would, of course, have to do some research on that regard on my own. Let's see. It's not entirely specified as to who he was infused to. I believe he was just a heroic spirit, not infused to anyone at all, if I understand that correctly. So he's, in course, considered a grand servant, and a grand caster in that regard as well. Overall, he would interesting. Extremely interesting. Ars Nova, Ars Helena, and Ars Almadei. Ars Almadel Salomonis. This is honestly a huge revelation. I think more research is absolutely required for this. And to think that he is in possession of 3 noble phantasms. I didn't take the time to look too thoroughly into this, unfortunately. Otherwise, after knowing upon this, I would, without a doubt, capitalize implementing him as one of the more notable choices for working through this whole system, for establishing the generations. I don't know enough about Solomon, but it is, of course, my own error not taking the time to investigate him thoroughly on this. Let's see. So the third other option would, of course, be Leonardo da Vinci. Now, it is, of course, noted that, obviously, Leonardo da Vinci is male, based on realism standards. This is pretty much the established connection of what Leonardo da Vinci would appear to be within the Fate universe at this particular presence of time, being established as a caster class. And then, obviously, that would incur magic as a result. The alignment being that she inhabits the same exact traits and artistic abilities of the original Leonardo da Vinci, being intricate and inquisitive of mind as well, also establishing her presence as a caster. And seeing that her alignment is chaotic good, taking this into account, self-aware that there is practically no one who can rival her output. The sole person that can compare with her is more or less Michelangelo, really. But even that is only in the field of the fine arts. In other outputs, other fields such as science and mathematics, there is no one who surpasses her. What is the reason? It's learning. So I would, without a doubt, determine that as the primary established fact in that regard. First, welcome, the observer. So Solomon would have been another really good option. Solomon and Leonardo da Vinci. It does bring to mind that Leonardo da Vinci does got me to recall our encounters with him when we were encountering all of the influential events through the perspective of Ezio Auditore, the assassin, whom is hailed as the prophet within France. But that is an entirely different tale and turn of events within human presence and influence in time. Completely different. Nonetheless, she is a core and key aspect within the Chaldea's secret organization. Security. So, ultimately, after all the work had been put in, we had came up with Mash Curelite being the primary subject of this account. In the end. So, taking that in regards to what all of the abilities associated with a Shielder class servant could benefit from, as a Milletian in this case. Without a doubt, the obvious choices that, of course, are really self-explanatory will, of course, be going down this list. Combat Mastery. We have Ruined Guard, Light Armor Mastery. We have Heavy Armor Mastery. We have Charge, Lance Charge. We got Bash, though it's not exactly with shields. We got Mastery in Evasion, Crisis Escape, and some other masteries and specialties that are associated with a Shielder class. I would say some of the lance skills within the talent of close combat quarters also makes a befitting presence within the skill sets of Mash Curelite as well, being that she is infused with Galahad's spirit. Galahad is, of course, the son of Lancelot himself, and by extension, lances are pretty much a part of Lancelot and his son's overall toolkit as well, in general. So this of itself also makes itself quite befitting in this regard. Let's see. Overall, next comes the application of strength. The strength stat, of course, provides buffs towards defense. And obviously everyone knows what defense is. the ability to reduce physical damage, and it is of course affected by your strength here within this universe. Overall, the initial goal moving forward will of course be to acquire Elemental Knight to inhibit those particular skills and abilities within Mash's skill set as well. Moving forward, that would of course require a great deal of grinding, needing the prerequisite of hitting at the very least a total level of 20k. So that is a long road moving forward. Hopefully it'll be a fast road though. With that being said and put to mind, as we of course continue to progress with the generations and stories, we'll be putting emphasis on certain skills and abilities moving forward, such as once the first generation is completed. With the second generation, it will of course involve the overall transformation that inhibits and incurs a greater power upon the individual themselves. So, in the case of giants, it will of course be Beast. And quite unknowingly and rather unusual, with the appearance that beasts seem to possess, it gives off a berserker type of classification in regards to its appearance. To put that into a bit of perspective, this is of course what I'm going to be referring to in this case. So the transformation itself, of course, raises notable stats by a great deal, as well as acquiring different forms of passives. The transformations themselves implement and increase certain parametered stats by several accounts in regards to what that particular transformation specializes towards. For example, giants will always receive more strength and willpower as a stat, whereas for the elves falcon equivalent, they will receive more stats in towards intelligence and dexterity. Interesting. According to these numbers, by an obvious note that's already been proven and well established, elves will without a doubt always have weaker stats by most accounts, and more handicapped positions, just to put it nicely, in comparison to their beast or giant counterparts. A primary example, they're given, based on these numbers, a general broad range across the board, save for mana and life in this comparison. Humans have their possession of Paladin and Dark Knight, respectively. But to determine that befitting image towards the transformation of the giant's first evolution. It will, of course, be what the beast appears to be in this regard. So we have, of course, the first level being Savage Beast, the second level being Beast Slugger, which is obtained after ranking the first form up to rank A. The third form being Iron Beast, drawing even deeper into the bestial or primal form of the particular transformation. And then lastly, stopping on the final transformation, that would be, of course, Beast Lord. This, in and of itself, would without doubt be quite appealing to establish a presence of conflict with the spirit itself that resides within Mesh Curelite, boring out of control and unleashing its overall fullest potential in such a regard. I don't know. That's just simply a concept that is, of course, coming to mind at the moment. But overall, I would say it feels quite intriguing and befitting. Otherwise, the opposite choice, if Mesh was more so established as a human through this concept, the transformations that would be present or available to her as an initial choice would, of course, be either Paladin or Dark Knight. Now, taking into regards of this, I don't see these particular form-altering transformations being completely onset connected towards what originally presents the figure of Mesh. As far as I can tell, she engages into conflict or combat, bearing her signature shield, and with a sword off on her hip in some or other cases where the situation presents itself. But overall, her main focus is, of course, her shield and the many uses or capabilities that she is able to perform with it. Be it from guarding, from deflecting, bashing, using it offensively and defensively. And overall, the giants are more than capable of performing these feats of capability in this regard as well, in my honest opinion. So what you see here are pretty much the four forms associated with the Paladin choice of the human's transformation. I would say these transformations are more befitting to Saber or Arteria Pendragon, aka Saber, where then we would have the Dark Knight's version. And with the Dark Knight's version, so too comes the differential in stats, as well as the appearance as well. With the Dark Knight, it does encompass the means of drawing upon the dark or negative energies that encompass humans in their regard. This, though, the whole color scheme for the Dark Knights obviously would fit in with Mesh. The concept itself, with where Dark Knights originate from, or contrast from, being that they delve on pretty much negative emotions and the presence of self-interest in that regard, is completely opposite to what MASH is originally presented. So, in such a case, though MASH does wear black armor and possesses a shield as her armament or weapon of choice. Well, pretty much primary weapon. Her image will not fit any of the core concepts that establish the premise of the Dark Knight. And in account to the Paladin, as I mentioned before, it is definitely more so established or connected towards the saber-class servant, Arturier Pendragon, more so than anything else, being the absolute epitome of humility and righteousness in that regard. And thus far, that and other reasons had resulted in me establishing the overall choice of determining MASH towards being a giant race instead of a human. Okay. With that being said, I would like to say this was pretty much the overall concept that had came to mind while taking into consideration of all of the numerous features and outcomes that would make themselves present throughout the story, throughout all of the generations, as we of course progress through them moving forward. With that being said, I'm hoping that this of course starts coming into connection towards each other quite nicely moving forward. I'll be making an effort towards establishing the presence of all of these concepts, intertwining them into the overall story to the absolute best of my ability, and by a more so a narrative standpoint moving forward. So I would say, hoping that this overall behind the scenes feature provides means of being able to help establish that primary onset of comparison for this concept as a whole. And I'm hoping that you guys are of course looking forward to how I, pretty much piece it all together and bring it all into a synergistic core perspective or overall experience for the story as a whole moving forward. With that in mind, I hope hoping it all comes together, honestly. With that in mind, to keep track of the overall story, please subscribe and leave a like on this first video of prominent story development moving forward. And if of course you're also an avid fan of the Fate franchise and many of their overall stories and concepts that they pretty much represent as a whole. And I'm quite curious. If you made it this far into the video, please leave a comment here stating what is your most favored class among the 7 major or minor classes even. Who is it that you are most prone to go towards provisionally, or the go-to class? That being either Saber, Lancer, Archer, Berserker, Caster, Assassin, or Rider. And with that in mind, I'd like to say matane. Till next week, guys. We'll begin delving into the overall storyline. Matane.